everyone. It's great to have the commissioners back and to have all of you who are on Zoom and other ways of following this, and of course to our panelists. This is our sixth and final session as we move toward developing an action plan for this administration as to how to harness the potential in our schools to deal with the issue of climate change and the importance of climate change. And it's exciting today to this final session to be hearing from students and parent organizers, because we have heard from a variety of groups around the country, people in different parts of the educational system. And there's a lot to be put together now with our panel and in the recommendations. So we're after our panel discussion, we're going to hear from Governor Jay Inslee, who, as many of you know, is governor of the state of Washington and who, as a presidential candidate in the last cycle, made climate change his major focus. So he's going to help us talk a little bit further about how states can be enablers, state governments can be enablers in working with schools and school districts to deal with the issue. So we're excited to go ahead with this, and I'll turn it over to my co-chair, John King, Secretary King.
Thanks so much, Governor. Welcome, everybody. We're excited about today's conversation. So let me just jump right to introducing the panel. The panel is going to help us understand how we continue to grow the movement for climate action in schools. We're going to hear from the panelists, then there'll be time for the Commissioner Q&A. We're going to hear first from Andrew Brennan. Andrew is the co-founder of the Kentucky Student Voice team, which helps to amplify students as partners in educational decision-making in the state. He's also a National Geographic Education Fellow and a master's student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. We're going to hear from Jerome Foster. Jerome, at 18 years old, serves on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, works as executive director of 1 Million of Us, a youth-led movement supporting activism and civic engagement, and he studies computer science in New York City. And we're going to hear from Anna King, who has over 20 years of leadership experience at all levels of the PTA, including Oklahoma PTA president, and is currently president-elect of the National PTA. And she has 3 children, 10 grandchildren, and loves being a nana and a child advocate. So we're excited to hear from this panel, and we'll just jump right in with you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Secretary King. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Brennan, and I am the co-founder of the Kentucky Student Voice team. The Kentucky Student Voice team works to position students across the Commonwealth of Kentucky as education research, advocacy, and policy partners. At any given time, our team represents roughly 100 Kentucky students, mostly middle school through college age, along with many adult allies. We believe that students who spend 35 hours a week in the classroom might have something meaningful to contribute to discussions about how to improve that classroom. Radical, I know. At the heart of everything we do is listen to other students. Because we consist of only 100 or so young people, and because we tend to draw students who are successful in school, we know our members themselves do not represent the entire Kentucky student experience. This is why our core strategy is to reach out to other students from all backgrounds in the form of student-to-student interviews and roundtable discussions. This means talking to the handful of minority students about race in a mostly white rural school. This means visiting students at the Kentucky School for the Deaf and communicating with them using sign language interpreters. This means listening to students who lack secure housing describe what it's like to try to do well in school when they are worried about where they are going to sleep each night. And this means that we are serious about amplifying and elevating the voices of students who are least heard in our schools and in halls of power where decisions are made. For example, in 2016, after documenting the barriers that too many Kentucky students face in getting to and through college, we launched the Powerball Promise campaign to convince our Republican governor and Democratic House Speaker to work together and end the decades-old process of diverting lottery funds away from their intended beneficiaries, low-income Kentucky students. In 1 year, we were able to move $14 million back into the scholarship fund to support thousands of additional Kentucky students to attend college. It was around this time that my eyes were opened to the power of student activism. I'm now an education fellow with National Geographic, where I continue to support youth-led movements and organizations all around the world. Over the past year and a half, I have met with young leaders from dozens of countries who are taking action to solve an array of problems facing their communities. I can tell you firsthand, they are much more diverse than the media portrays. Young people are leading strikes and engaging federal policymakers, but they are also leading research projects, scaling community service initiatives, challenging school and local officials, creating compelling stories that move people to action, and educating their peers on the importance of climate justice because their schools aren't. It was around this time that I first came across Aspen's K-12 Climate Action Initiative. However, it was not until I was in class with Dr. Shifter that I began to dig deeper into the policies and recommendations and realized the opportunity for Kentucky. Folks like to make a lot of assumptions about Kentucky, but here are the facts. We were the first, home to the first net zero carbon school in the nation. Currently, we have the second most net zero carbon schools and emerging net zero carbon schools in the country, second only to California. And in 2009, 11 years ago, we invested millions to transition over 150 of our school buses from poisonous diesel to hybrid, with Pike County, Kentucky, and far eastern parts of the state taking the largest advantage of the program. In Kentucky, we have an opportunity to double down both on addressing the impact, climate impact that our school system has, while preparing the students of Kentucky, particularly those in Appalachia and in our inner cities, to be leaders in the new green economy. But like most issues in education and in climate, we cannot do it without the leadership, creativity, and passion that young people bring to the table. Education and climate are two issues where students are uniquely positioned to bring distinct added value. When we do not tap into their expertise, we are operating with one hand tied behind our backs. So to the young people listening who are passionate about protecting the climate and their communities, but don't know where to start, look to your schools. There's work to be done. And to the adults listening who believe in the role our education system must play in addressing climate change and preparing citizens to participate robustly in our democracy, find ways to partner with the young people in your community. You have as much to learn from them as they have to learn from you. Thank you.
Jerome, you're up next.
Thank you. My name is Jerome Foster II. I'm 18 years old. I serve as the youngest member of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and I'm also the executive director of 1 Million of Us, which is a national youth-led organization which mobilized millions of young people to turn out to vote in the 2020 election. From organizing through virtual reality to going to schools and having one-on-one conversations, to continue to organize now to create a curriculum that centers young people and centers climate justice and moving forward. Today, I want to discuss some of the changes that have happened over the past few years and how that will translate into our future. I'm a climate striker, like Andrew said, one of those young people who organized at the White House. I was the first young person to organize in Washington, D.C. at the White House for 58 weeks and organized internationally, where now we have tens of millions of young people on practically every single continent on the planet organizing strikes. And through that work, we were able to pass historic climate legislation in Washington, D.C. We're able to pass the Climate Change Education Act. Me and my peers were elected to the DC State Board of Education as the only representatives of our entire peer group to revamp the high school graduation requirements for the class of 2030 and to include environmental education and climate science as the core subject to our curriculum. And through that work, we want to take that nationwide. So through my organization, 1 Million of Us, we have a plethora of initiatives that goes from creating an app that allows for, well, it's already deployed. The app is growing now. We have an app that is going out and basically going to communities and they're able to organize themselves, because for so long, young people have had to go to Twitter or Instagram or somewhere else to organize to vote and spread voter information, which can sometimes be just blurred by just misinformation. And that's one of our initiatives right there. It's just to have a network of young people who are activists, who are centered around justice, just creating that space to learn. And another thing that we're doing is also on the legislative side. We have youth lobby days once a year where we're able to meet with tens of elected representatives from the House and Senate side and Democrat and Republican side to talk about these climate issues. Like in 2017, we had over 120 young people organize, meet with 36 elected representatives to sign the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. And the year after, we went and advocated for the Climate Change Education Act, which is what we're pushing, which is what we pushed for last week when we met with them again. And it's incredibly moving to see these elected representatives over time, because the first time we went there, they were saying we have to have all three branches of government. Young people really don't have the power. If you actually just vote in one party over another, then we can make change. And we've seen that. We've seen that shift. And now when we came back this year, they said, thank you, because young people made up 17% of every single vote cast in the 2020 election. Without us, Biden would not be president. Without us, all of these legislative options would not be available, because we organized. We had entire movements spring up out of this election. And now that's pushing for climate justice. We're now seeing young people included on the scale of curriculum development, included on how do we allocate funds to frontline communities, and a plethora of other initiatives. So I just want to urge this group to continue to look to youth-led organizations to provide the resources for our generation, because for so long it's just been hard to get off the ground. It's like organizing and trying to get a few donations here and there, but it's it's so crucial, because it's just from Georgia to New York City to California, we just after class meet from 6 to 9 p.m. and say, hey, let's see what we can do. Let's see how we can organize around climate justice and actually put out a curriculum, because if no one else is going to make the curriculum, we know what we want to learn. We know what is important to us. And if we learn about things that aren't centered in our brain, that isn't going to be conducive to us to learn. So we put together how do we have companies come and present to us, like Tesla? How do we actually learn how to install solar panels and wind turbines? And how do we actually make it exciting? Because for us, if we have an actual car come and our teachers show us how that car works, how our charging station works, how a wind turbine is function, that changes our outlook on how we see the climate and how we're able to be a part of the solution and not be a part of the conversation right now, which is the activism sort of it, has been large-scale climate anxiety. Every time we talk to our peers and host a town hall, and for me, it was a different reaction growing up in DC and seeing protests and shifting to activism. But for so many of Generation Z, it's just been anxiety because there's no solution seen. We've just grown up in a system where we feel like the solutions are just around the corner, but they're never actually being taken. So we think through this curriculum, it's a long-term strategy to institute it on a nationwide scale, because we've done it in DC, we're working on doing it in New York City now, and we want to continue that work just from the grassroots level and just continue to make the change. So I'm grateful to be able to talk to you guys today, and it's an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you, Jerome. Anna, have fun following these two young men because they have been incredible. But Anna, it's you now.
I told you that from the beginning. I'm inspired, and this is why I'm inspired. And this is what PTA is about. We're about advocating for our kids and making sure that they reach their highest level. And we have two young men that are doing that today, right now. And man, kudos to you guys. Wow. I'm truly inspired and kind of lost for words. Great job, guys. Great job. Good night, afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Anna King, and I am the president-elect for National PTA. As you know, National PTA is a proud member of the K-12 Climate Action. We're excited to be a part of this important work, unlocking the power of the education sector to be a force towards the climate action and solutions and environmental justice to help prepare our children and youth to advance more sustainable, equitable society. National PTA is the oldest and the largest volunteer child advocacy association in the United States. And we have millions of members in all 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and even the Department of Defense schools overseas. Our mission is to make sure that every child's potential becomes a reality. And like I said, I'm inspired by listening to these two young men because that is what we reach for. We want our children to be a voice and to reach their potential. And as PTA, we know that the issues affecting today's youth extend beyond the classroom. Right here on the screen, proven fact. And we agree that children and the youth will lead our fight against climate change. As Andrew and Jerome have stated, the youth voice is very crucial. Therefore, we are committed to empowering children and the youth with knowledge and the skills to build more sustainable and equitable world. They are our now and our future. And I would like to take a couple of minutes to share some of the work that we've done around climate action. Much of our advocacy and educational work is guided by position statements and resolutions that are adopted by our board and our membership. In 2003, our environmental work has been guided by a position statement titled Environmental Health, Remediation, Sustainability, and Climate Change. We recognize that the growing importance of environmental issues and the impact that they have had on the health and welfare of our children and their families. We believe that PTA members have a responsibility to promote environmental health and safety and to protect our world's natural resources. Our advocacy beliefs are detailed in our position statements, and especially in this one, but the main point is that National PTA urges our members at all levels to monitor, support, and advocate for laws, regulations, and programs that promote environmental education. We are particularly supportive of those that educate students on climate and energy literacy and human sustainability, and that we make schools carbon neutral and energy efficient, and encourage the use of renewable energy and technology. We also supported legislation which aligns with our position statement. As far as most recently, with our public policy priorities for the 117th Congress, we called on our elected leaders and administrations to modernize our schools, including making them green, so the energy consumption and carbon footprints are reduced. We're also seeing more and more that our state PTAs are taking leading roles in the space of climate change through the adoptions of our resolution and direct action. And we are amplifying their efforts. For example, this year at our legislative conference, we had over 800 attendees. It was our very first virtual conference. And we were excited because these 800 attendees had the opportunity to talk to our legislators in DC, which was amazing. The Washington State PTA was even chosen to present their important work on climate change that they're doing in their state. The importance of the parent and caregiver voice is crucial when we're having conversations and doing our advocacy efforts around climate action, and it cannot be overrated. We know, however, the effective advocacy does not happen in silos, and to be effective, advocates must collaborate. National PTAs and all of our PTAs nationwide collaborate constantly and effectively with different organizations and community groups and policymakers on issues for everything. As we think today about how to grow this movement around climate action, I encourage you guys to think of PTA as potential partners. To help make this happen, I would like to offer you a few suggestions. First, know that there is a district, and state PTAs that can be powerful allies to environmental groups. That means that we have them in all of our schools, most of our schools across the country, and the school districts and our states. Second, once you've been engaged with PTA, find areas of agreement and move those forward. Third, once you have established a collaborative relationship, suggest working with the local or district or state PTA to help them develop statements and resolutions or position statements on climate action. Finally, ask your local district or state PTA who they work with in coalitions just on these issues in order to find additional potential partners to grow the movement. We have many core values, and collaboration is one of them for National PTA. And we know that effective collaboration will help us fulfill our mission of making every child's potential a reality. And we do that by engaging and empowering our families and communities to use their voice loudly to advocate for our children. We look forward to collaborating with you as we work together to advance climate action. And I want to say thank you so much for having me today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you to both of the boys. And given that we have Governor Inslee coming at the end, so we're going to be a little pressed for time, it really is, this is our last listening session. It's important that the commissioners get their opportunity to ask questions. So I'll take a bye on this, but I would like to hear at some point from Andrew and Jerome, what woke them up to climate change? Was it their parents, or was it something that happened around them? Because that, I think, is important for all of us to know. I'll turn it to Secretary King. We'll get it. I'll get to Jerome and Andrew later.
Yeah. I think Carla, you had a question, so I think you're first up.
Sure. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the presentation. It was very inspiring. And the question that I have, Carla Thompson Payton, I'm a commissioner, and the question that I have is targeted towards Andrew and Jerome. What advice would you give young people interested in leading advocacy efforts in their local community?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that has really sparked a lot of young people that we know from our state chapters is that it just starts from just learning about it. I think educating yourself about how to be civically active in your community is the first step. But one of the things is that through many of us, we have basically a toolkit to start organizing, whether you need to learn how to call a member of Congress or how to get a petition to host a march. We help provide all of those resources for young people that want to get involved that don't really know like all of the legislation around like actually organizing. I think that's really one of the key ways. Also, I think one way to really just understand how your local legislation works is just to continue to be in contact with your local elected representatives. I always encourage people to call a member of Congress, because during my time, I used to intern for Congressman John Lewis, and he was an incredible person. He was always called, but only 30 people called him a day. So I think that if 10 people that are part of the organizing in a local state call a member of Congress, they have a crucial impact in how they pass legislation. So I always just encourage them to start there and ask them what support do they need, what bills are they co-sponsoring and need more public support around organizing. And that can also help to inform how they organize as well.
And I would just add that young people need to trust themselves and trust their own stories. They're the only ones that have the experience that they have. And adults might try to discount that, but they should trust that it's their experience and it matters. And also not to wait for permission. It's very unlikely that folks with power are going to just hand it over to you as a young person. And so don't wait for permission when it comes to demanding a seat at the table where decisions are being made that affect your life. But also, I mean, I have a message for funders. Youth-led organizations have throughout history and throughout this country been on the forefront of so many important movements, yet to this day, funders do not support them as robustly as they could, to the point that Jerome made earlier. Funders should consider including young people as part of their RFP development process, as part of their grant review process, on their boards, in the same way that district boards of directors have young people. Funders should reduce barriers and consider smaller dollar grants to support community organizations. And they should break down silos between their different funding priorities and recognize the interdisciplinary aspect, intersectionality of these issues in the same way that young people do. Governor Whitman, to your question earlier, when did I first become aware of climate change? I actually don't remember, frankly. I've always felt like I was aware of the climate emergency that we face, and I think most young people might agree with that. But what I do hear from a lot of young people is paralysis about what to do about it. We're hearing so many different statistics, so many different tactics and policies. And my advice to them would be to start at their school. There's so many things at the school level that can be done that will improve not only your health and your environment, but that can train you to make further impact down the road. So I would encourage young people not to forget about the climate catastrophe that's happening and perpetuating by our school system.
Thank you. Let's turn to Valerie.
Thank you. I am Valerie Rockefeller. I chair the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. We are a foundation. So Andrew, I hear you on how we need to be more democratic and respectful in our grant making. We are working on it. The whole field is. And Andrew, actually, I had a question for you. I also feel you, by the way, on being from Kentucky thing. I'm from West Virginia, and there is a narrative about the Appalachia, frankly, that can be internalized. So my question to you is, how have you engaged with families, not the incredible families already engaged in the PTA, but families who have felt, whose voices have not been respected, who may become a barrier to their children, perhaps, in being advocates?
It's a really, really interesting question. One of the first members of the Student Voice team was a prolific writer, and she wrote at length about the barriers that she faced trying to get to and through college. And one of the challenges is each time she wanted to speak about the fact that her family had less resources, the fact that she had this aspiration to leave Knox County to go to school in another location, she'd receive a lot of pushback from her parents who weren't interested in her talking about these issues in this way, who weren't interested in them being public about them. But I think just as many parents have seen what their young people are capable of and have been inspired by the vision of the future that young people are able to push forward. I've seen parents completely change their positions on issues because their children are showing them research or pointing out some additional piece of information. And so I think it can be powerful. The thing to remember from a mathematical perspective is that it takes two people to make one child. And so as we're thinking about engaging voters, as we're thinking about how we build a coalition, I think it's very powerful to consider young people as advocates to reach their families. There's a ton of research, a ton of family engagement models out there about what it means to engage families in the context of education, but I think a lot of them could do well by incorporating student voice and students themselves more robustly in those frameworks, honoring the agency that we know students have and can bring to the table.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Congressman Corbella.
Thank you, Secretary King, and thanks to these wonderful students, Andrew and Jerome, for these presentations. I don't want to be rude to all of the many people who have presented to us, but these by far are the most engaging and really inspirational presentations. My question's for Anna on PTA. I was really happy to see down here in Miami-Dade, where I'm from, that the PTA is mobilizing to have the school board pass a resolution for the district to make a net zero commitment, I think by 2040, which, to be fair, I think is pretty aggressive and ambitious compared to what we see around the world. But nevertheless, I think that's a wonderful initiative. Are you aware of other districts or PTAs and other districts trying to launch similar initiatives or advocate in this way?
We and thank you for that, because Florida PTA is amazing, and the council there in Miami-Dade, you have some amazing leaders that want to see the future for kids. But we do have different states that are doing the same thing. California State PTA adopted a resolution on climate change, where they were asking climate change for children's safety. In the state of Illinois, they adopted a resolution that talked about the 4 pillars of the K-12 climate action. So we do have states, we do have local units that are doing some amazing work. The thing is that we need more people to be involved and to come and to help our parents, to become these partners with them, to get them educated more so on the topics, because in our schools right now, they're facing many things, especially with the COVID going on. And I see my lights blinking on and off, and that's kind of scary. So please forgive me for that. But finding amazing leadership is extremely important, and building these partnerships and getting this information out is what we've been prioritizing. And so we see it making a difference, because they're going beyond the schools, they're going into the communities, and they're speaking out at their districts, and it's all across the country. It's not just in a few states. We have local units and districts doing the same thing. So we see this powerful change coming forth from many of our leaders across the country.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks so much, Anna. Given time, I'm going to suggest that we take the 3 questions, and then we'll give the panelists time to respond, and that way we can stop when Governor Inslee is able to join us. So, Deborah, if you could ask your question, and then Lisa, if you could ask yours, and then Governor Markell, if you could ask yours, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to all of the presenters. I think you are all doing an incredible job and are very inspiring. My question is to the 2 young men. You know, you are very empowered, and you've taken this position of really creating the change that you want to see and the need to involve youth. And I'm wondering, how do you inspire other youth to feel empowered, and how do you get around that feeling of hopelessness that I hear from a lot of children in my community about not feeling like they have the power to create change?
Thanks, Deborah. Lisa?
Yeah, I am also Lisa Hoyos. I'm with the National League of Conservation Voters, and I just chatted this letter because there's so many movement leaders on this call, and it involves clean buses and other things, but it's a letter signed by just was released today, 1,000 elected officials, 10 governors, including Governor Inslee, more than 100 mayors, and it's calling on the congressional leadership to pass a strong economic recovery that centers justice, climate, and jobs. But what I wanted to say is that part of that economic recovery costs includes $20 billion for school buses. And my question then is, you both mentioned engaging with elected officials, and I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how you think you can leverage your leadership to move the kinds of elected officials who got on this letter, including a bunch of school board folks who kind of took the first step, but they're not as engaged as the fierce urgency of now demands. So just your vision, the 2 of you.
Thank you, Lisa. Governor Markell?
Thank you. And let me add my voice of thanks to all the panelists. All 3 of you were terrific. And sort of along the lines of Lisa's question, just imagine for a moment that this were a meeting of the biggest funders in the country. And they had asked you to think big and to say to them, if they were prepared to make a significant grant to fund your efforts and those like them to really move the needle on this issue. What is it that you would be recommending to them about where we could really have significant impact if the funders stepped up and supported your work and similar work across the country?
Great, thank you, Governor. So Andrew, Jerome, I think basically you have to answer, how would you motivate other students, elected officials, and what should funders invest in and do that each in 2 minutes.
You can go first, Andrea.
Sure. Well, okay, let me just quickly, first of all, I would flip the script on how to motivate students. Fact of the matter is, it's the collective result of our schools over the course of over 10 years that lead to students feeling like they don't have a voice and that they can't make decisions that affect their lives. Students do have agency. We can remind them of that, but it's up to schools to respect that agency and how they think about governing and building those school buildings. So I put the onus on school decision makers, those with the actual power. When it comes to school buses, I make a 3-part case. First of all, school buses are frankly poisonous. Like, the research on how diesel emissions impact student achievement is quite clear, and it's not good. First of all, I would never let my kid on a yellow school bus that was run by diesel. But second of all, the case to be made is both that it increases student health, bolsters student achievement, and helps to save the district's money over the long run. So as folks are thinking about what to spend this influx of COVID emergency relief money on, I say point to school buses as an opportunity to make an upfront investment that accrues benefit to school districts and students, most importantly, over the long term. And in terms of what funders can do, I would just remind folks that the vast majority of program officers at foundations in this country are white. 80% of teachers are white, along with principals, superintendents, chief state school officers. They're all white, but 60% of our student population and more is of color. So when we're talking about shifting power to students in the education system, we are really talking about shifting power from white folks to folks of color. And so I'm thinking about things like school governance structures that have the opportunity to meaningfully integrate young people with voting membership. I'm thinking about research initiatives that don't meaningfully include research subjects as research designers should no longer receive funding from foundations who have an equity mindset. And I'm also thinking about the siloing of these issues, which is what I mentioned earlier. There are too many funders that conceive of their democracy strategy as being separate from their education strategy, as being separate from their climate change strategy. The truth is, these are quite intersectional issues that require working together to solve any of them. So we should be thinking about all of these things intersectionally, and funders should be willing to be working with the program officers on their other teams to make these kinds of investments. So that's my quick response to those thoughts.
Fantastic. Jerome?
Yeah, absolutely. I was listening to all the great things that these questions were awesome. I definitely want to shout out Lisa. Legal Conservation Voters has been the first organization to help us on the operations side of setting up our march on the Capitol. So I definitely want to thank you guys for that. It was amazing. But yeah, taking on the first point of motivating, I think for young people, the first step to motivation is just to make sure that that we have a pathway to solutions. I think I graduated from high school less than a year ago. And before I founded 1 Million of Us, the pathway to a sustainable future was unclear. And through organizing and through just adult mentorship, I think that really opens eyes, because motivation is only available when we're able to see a path forward and see the path to sustainability. Also building on that, to Jack's point, if we had unlimited funding, the work that 1 Million of Us is doing is that we want to go internationally and also help young people that are in other democratic countries, that in countries in general, that need to understand the climate crisis. Because I've met so many young people from Pakistan to Bangladesh to northern Syria to talk about climate is also on their mind. They also want to be able to have access to resources and access to climate education through a curriculum that's centralized, run by young people, organized by young people, and is able to talk about issues that we care about. So I think if we're able to do that, we'll reach internationally, continue development on our app, because so many young people from Cambridge, where we started the development process, to now being launched on the App Store, we have seen so much positive like development, but we only have 2 like part-time coders that are in first year freshman college that need more support on that end as well. So I think that would be where our investment would go to. And also to Lisa's point around how we continue to invest in young people in the future, I think just continuing to support like youth-led organizations. It's continuing to support the work that we're doing is like crucial. And also on congressional leadership and how we pass bills, a lot of it is continuing to show our face. Like we've organized lobby days for the past 3 years, and the messaging has been so different each time we've gone. Like we met with Representative Norton last week, and she's trying to pass DC statehood. And that's also intersectional with a lot of DC organizing, because a lot of the activism across Washington, DC amongst young people is climate activism. So we're able to work and organize and see how can we continue to press forward through meeting with elected representatives. So it's yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm taking up too much time.
No, that was awesome. Thank you, Jerome. I wanted to jump in to thank you and Andrew and Anna for spending time with us. This was a fantastic conversation. It's really
I have to thank Representative Inslee. We met about a year ago for the climate debate. So I was glad to see you again. Thank you for joining. It's great to see you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I echo what Secretary King said, and thank you to the panel. And Governor Inslee, I hope you got a taste of what this panel has been about and how exciting actually all 6 of these panels, these listening sessions that we've had have been, and how informative. And to those of you who don't know the governor, he has been governor of the state of Washington since 2012 and has walked the talk on climate change. He was a leader, as I mentioned before. In his presidential run, he made that issue front and center. And so we're really honored to have him with us today and to have an opportunity to ask him some questions at the end of his remarks, but to listen to what he has to say about how states can be enablers and how the role that governors play in this kind of outreach. So Governor Inslee, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you. This is exciting to me because we have such a huge force that we have available to us to defeat climate change, and that's the upcoming generations of leaders in our country. And their social awareness, their commitment to justice, their willingness to push the boundaries, we have that resource. It's an incredible resource. And if we just do our part, which is to arm them with the scientific information about this, I'm confident they're going to get this job done. But to do that, I think we as governors can do a lot of great work, and legislators, to arm them with scientific information so that they can do their part. And that is our responsibility. It's part of our moral responsibility here. I do think that when thinking about climate change, the more broadly we think of this, the better, that it's not just an environmental issue. It's a health issue, it's an economic issue, and it's an educational issue. So the fact that this group's thinking about this, I'm really impressed by. By the way, I'm glad to join some of my heroes here. Jack Markell, a former governor who's been a hero of mine in this issue, Randy Weingarten. We got a great group on here, so I'm glad to be able to join you. A couple comments about this. The central thing you said, can governors help in here? You bet. Governors are absolutely pivotal in this. That's one of the reasons we started the U.S. Climate Alliance, to try to get governors engaged in this, including in our educational efforts. And so if you want to think of the most important folks actually in the country to improve education around this, I'd say it is governors, because they lead the show on the legislative and financial agendas on their states. So it's good that people recognize that. And I'm glad the governors are getting engaged. We see great leadership going on across the United States in this regard. We've had some success in our state, but we have more work to do, including in my state. We've passed the best 100% clean energy bill in the United States. We've passed the best energy efficiency standards in the United States, but we still don't have a clean fuel standard. I'm working on that actually this morning to get a clean fuel standard. So I point this out with all the crowing that I may make about my state on the work we've done, including on the educational front. We have more work to do. And that's why I'm so glad this new generation is coming to the front lines of this issue, and none too soon. The forest fires that have been raging in my state. 2 out of the last 3 years have had, 100-year forest fires. Yesterday, Auburn, Washington, which is just south of Seattle, where supposedly it always rains, had a forest fire in Auburn, Washington. So this is something that I'm really glad we got the younger generation coming up, because time is of the essence. We know that. And we just got to do our part for my generation to get people educated. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, these questions. I hope I can provide a few answers. We've got some good stories to tell in Washington because we've had some success, and I'm looking forward to easy questions here.
Thanks so much for being here, Governor. Really admire your leadership on this issue. It's good to see you again. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how we convince more people to take a whole of government approach to this issue rather than seeing climate as just an environmental issue, seeing it as actually vital to the work across agencies, including, of course, education.
Well, I would say we do it from the top down or bottom up. From the top down, we've got a president who has fully embraced this all of government approach. And I got to tell you, I'm just thrilled by what the Biden administration is doing on this right now, because there is no base they have not touched within the government. In transportation, they have focused on having decarbonizing our transportation sector. In health, they've understood the intersectionality with health. And environmental justice, they understand the intersectionality of justice. We had a great moment for justice yesterday in our nation in reducing the systemic racism that we have experienced. And now in what the administration is proposing is one of the largest environmental justice proposals in some of their efforts to focus their investments when we do electrify and decarbonize our electrical grid, to focus those investments in BIPOC and in high poverty communities. And so they've embedded environmental justice throughout their proposals. Obviously, they got good work that's going on at Interior at EPA. So I would say at the top, we got really a good ally that has embraced an all government approach to this. But then obviously we got to replicate that in states as well. We're certainly doing it in my state, where I'm fighting for the greenest transportation program effort. We're going to talk about our educational components today. In our proposals, we actually, we're trying to get a cap and invest program as we speak in the last few days of our legislature. And if we get this through, it will have the most robust, targeted environmental justice proposals of any bill in the United States. And if we get this through, I'm going to be really happy about it. So we got to do it at the federal level, we got to do it at the state level, and at the local level, right? So this is a local issue too. And I think sometimes one of my central messages when I talk about climate change is everybody can be as powerful as the President of the United States here. In your county, when you develop your transportation county plan supporting public transportation, in your land use management decisions on fighting for more public access to housing, low-income housing next to public transportation. That's a climate issue. And everybody can be a champion here, even in their hometowns. So I would say all of us can be a champ for an all-of-government approach.
Governor, it's good to see you again. It's been a while since.
Good to see you, yes.
My question to you, since basically you indicated a pathway toward it, but while all government is fine, how, given that school districts and school administration is so local, how do you see, what tools do you see are the best ways to move forward to engage the parents, the citizens, to understand the importance, the impact that schools can have on this whole issue, both in educating students on the importance of climate change and on science, but also in hardening the schools themselves, starting with, as you heard at the end of Jerome's talk, or Andrew's talk about school buses and moving them to electrification.
Well, it's both requirements and incentives. Both are important in this regard. And we have embraced both in my state, for instance. So when you give an incentive program, we've got a program, we're going to have about $16 million for grant programs for outdoor education experiences to make it available to districts. to incentivize them to have these programs. And that's really attractive to people. People love the fact of getting their kids out into nature. We know that when you let a kid test the acidity of a little pond to see what impact it has on the amphibians, that's worth 4 years in a classroom to get them to connect their academic work to their real life. And so that's an incentive where you give money to a local district to be able to move forward and that kind of thing. Those things really work, but there are requirements as well. So we have requirements for large new school projects to reduce energy wastage, which obviously save districts money over the long term. And these are legally binding requirements in law as well. We have binding requirements in our curriculum. So we do have some state required curriculum in our science programs, which do require teaching climate science, which is a requirement. So it's a mix of incentives. There are some state requirements. All of those have benefit. The incentives are the easiest things to do politically, but they usually cost the most money, as you know from your time. So those are the easiest things to do, but they're just imperative, because when I think of our moral obligation to our children, I kind of think arming them with this fundamental understanding that this is the greatest threat to their futures. I think this is one of the highest moral obligation of my generation to the next 2 generations. So we got to use all the tools that are available to us.
Thanks, Governor. Nikki?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really want to build off of that response. And Governor Inslee, it's an honor to share this space with you. As someone who grew up in Washington State, I'm Yakama, Nisqually, Squaxin Island, and Cowlitz.
All right.
And so I grew up in the Washington State school system, and I've seen firsthand the need for Indigenous knowledge in the classroom. I still remember the pride I felt as an Indigenous student when an elder from Suquamish came into my history classes. And how can we normalize experiences like the one I had in my youth, and to make sure that states are upholding and honoring the government-to-government relationship within tribal communities, and elevate Native voices and normalize Native voices, especially in conversations of climate action.
You bet. Well, I appreciate bringing your heritage to this, and I love the fact that you have some Washington salmon behind you and Mount Rainier. The governor just spoke. I couldn't tell whether it was a sardine or a tuna behind her, but you've got salmon, Washington salmon, so I appreciate that on the wall. Listen, I think you do it in a whole many different ways. Here's kind of a creative way, is to celebrate our tribal leadership. I'm so excited. I signed a bill last week that will put Billy Frank Jr., who was our Washington leader who won the tribal rights to historic treaty salmon fishing rights. His statute's going on in Statuary Hall. He's replacing a former missionary here. And I mention this because I think symbolic things like this are important to give people, a visible and tangible recognition of our tribal leaders who've walked before us in this regard, in the battles that they've fought. I'm actually pretty excited about this. Billy Frank Jr. will be the person I've known who's actually in Statuary Hall. So I'm really excited about this. Second, we need more educators who are of tribal ancestry, and the recruiting talent into our education community profession is very, very important. We have a long ways to go to have our educational community reflect all their students, not just for the tribal community, for BIPOC members as well. I think only like 11% of our teacher cadre are BIPOC, and 35–40% of our students are. So this is an important issue to get folks a much more diverse educational effort. Third, in our curriculum itself, we need to require, and we do in our state, climate curriculum, but we also now are requiring tribal history and cultural as part of our training, as well as, we've now embraced more civics. This is part of our civics and history. So now we require, sharing the tribal community's experience as well in our history lessons. It's about time, right? Lewis and Clark did not discover the Columbia River. And so that's an important way as well to get that in there. So there's 3 ideas, and then we'll try to get you to be here to be a teacher at some point.
Thanks, Governor. Vic?
Hi, Governor Inslee.
Hi.
So I'd ask you a question. So I'm 22, a young person facing the climate crisis, and I know I'm not the only young person who looks at it as an extremely multifaceted issue that needs to have really multifaceted solutions. So I wanted to know what you think about how we ensure climate policies that prioritize social welfare just as much as they do carbon emissions, in order to ensure the best path to a more sustainable, resilient, equitable, awesome.
Yeah. Vic, are you in school now?
No, I'm not actually. I'm full-time working at an environmental nonprofit.
Oh, great. Well,
I
thanks.
live in Madison, Wisconsin, was just going to the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
All right, great. Well, thanks for your work. I'm glad we got leaders like you pushing the ball. A couple things. You know, first you need to teach the teachers so they can teach the students to make sure they embed the social values into the environmental science they're teaching. So we have a thing called Climb Time where we're basically providing a training to our teacher cadre, including in this subject. And this has been very, very exciting. We've had about 8,000 teachers go through this. And part of that is getting them to embed in how you teach this environmental justice ethic as part of the curriculum as well. So before you teach the students, you need to teach the educators, and we're in the process of doing that. By the way, the educators have really enjoyed this as well, to arm them to how to connect folks. So we want to put that as part of the educational curriculum as well. Now, you have to do the things that I've talked about a little bit earlier in all of your environmental policies. You have to embed environmental justice in all of your environmental policies. So I'll give you an example. In our Cap and Invest bill we're doing a couple things. One, we're directing, I think it's 35% of the investments that would be generated by the revenues that come from this program that goes to disproportionately impacted communities. So you direct the investment directly as a designated investment. We're also doing the first, it could be one of the first bills in the United States, which would create a new regulatory approach so that you would not allow this or any other program to result in a disproportionate impact on any particular community. Now, we've got that a little bit in our airshed federal clean air laws, but this would have another state-based approach to prevent too much toxicity. And we know that's happened. I remember meeting a 14-year-old Latinx young woman who did her own research. She said that she was 11 years old before she found out that there were some kids who didn't have asthma. All her friends had asthma because she's living right next to the freeway in South Seattle and the toxic waste industries. So we have to have a regulatory approach. We're adopting that. We hope to adopt that in the state of Washington. And we got to make sure that those are the approaches. So that's my answer. What's yours? What did I leave out? What do you think?
I thought it was a pretty comprehensive response, honestly, and the part that I won't take too long, but the part that I really enjoyed was talking about how it starts in schools, which obviously is everything that we're talking about here. But yeah. I think that's something that a lot of schools want to shy away from, but you don't have to, because kids are already thinking about those things.
Right.
Harder heavy, and they probably have a lot to teach teachers as well too. I'd be interested to see where the cross learning could happen and be facilitated on the policy basis. But yeah.
Well, one of the things, I appreciate you saying that. One of the things that's been helpful to our educators is, a lot of educators didn't have a huge amount of science, and they really want to have more confidence in teaching it. So if you're an English teacher or a drama teacher or art teacher, you may not have had a lot of science. So this gives them more confidence standing up and sharing this information. So it's really worked well. We want to expand it. Fortunately, we got a lot of smart young people. When I was your age, I didn't know what multifaceted meant. I would just say it was a big deal or something. I didn't multifaceted. That was way too multi-syllabic for me, but I'm glad we got smart young people.
Nina?
Yeah, it's a real honor to be here with you, Governor Inslee, and not just with you, but with all of our amazing panelists today. My name is Naina. I'm an organizer with the Sunrise Movement and a senior in high school based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I think as a student, a lot of what I've learned about climate solutions, I've learned outside of school through advocacy work. But I know a lot of students want that to change. And I think Andrew and Jerome are proof that students really do have the power and the drive required to shape their own education. So I'm wondering, with so many education decisions being made at the state level and the local level, what do you think students should ask for from federal and state and local lawmakers when it comes to seeing climate change and climate solutions actually integrated into what they're learning in the classroom? So where is there room for advocacy and for partnership there?
Well, I think what they should ask for is the truth, and that's what we need to give people. And the science, the truth of this is pretty well documented, obviously, beyond dispute. The one thing I would say when I talk to young people about this subject is that start with the person closest to you. Don't just start with Joe Biden, start with your science teacher, start with your counselor, start with the principal in your school saying, where's my curriculum? And I haven't had as much as I'm interested in. Can you help us provide that? I've always thought that local, very local relationship can be the most successful. And we don't actually think about it because sometimes we don't think about that as in a political realm. So the first advice I would give people is to just talk to the closest people around them that could help them achieve what they need. Then you start working up the ladder. Then you go to the school board, and you go to the school board meeting and you take two of your friends and you read a statement to them and say, how can you help us? We're asking you to. And then when the school board says, well, we need more money to educate the staff, then you go to your local legislator and you meet them at the grocery store or in their office or a cup of coffee, and then you talk to them. And after that, then you go to 10,000 people on Facebook and you get them to pound on the local leadership, the legislative leadership. So it's working up, starting at the closest. That's the advice I would give. And I would also give the rightful impatience. I think youth have a real advantage. They are morally untouchable. And so you can be very demanding in a sense. Because the future is yours, you can be kind of demanding on what you'd like to see. That is a right you have of youth. So those two things I hope will serve you well. And also, I hope you'll thank your governor, Governor Whitmer, who has really done some great work on climate. I've been very impressed what she's done. Now, she's been stymied a little bit by not having a legislature that hasn't gone along with her as much as they should. But if you see her, thank her for me. She's done some great work.
Will do. Thank you, Governor.
I think we only have you for 2 more minutes. So I'm going to ask Congressman Corbello to ask a quick question, and then we'd love your answer to that, and then any closing advice you have for us as we begin to prepare our report.
Thank you, Secretary King, and thanks, Governor, for joining us. No one understands the politics of climate change better than you do. You got plenty of scars to prove that. We're obviously exploring climate change in the context of education. Do you think education can be a bridge to help us build consensus on climate policy in the country? I mean, look, we need to take everything we can get now with the Biden administration, the current composition of Congress, but I think most people would agree that if we're going to get the durable kind of solutions that would be ideal, it'd be great to have some bipartisan consensus. Do you think education can help bridge that gap?
Most definitely, because it's less threatening to people. It can be more of a unifying force. You don't have to fight any giant corporations who feel immediately threatened by this activity. So I do think that, and health, and job creation, those 3 things in tandem are places where you can find more commonality with those on the other side of the aisle, frankly. And so we ought to seek every opportunity to do that. Now, it is still harder than it should be, right? There are still, when you try to get a curriculum to teach, as we have in our state, climate change, you still will see voices on one of the sides of the aisle that don't want to do that. I mean, I know that's shocking, but you still will find those pockets of resistance, but they are in full retreat. And they are in full retreat because our glaciers are in full retreat, our forests are in full retreat, and our fishing industry is in full retreat because you can't argue this anymore because the public now demands climate action. They get it. This is no longer an abstract issue of a line on a chart. It's not being able your kids go outside because the forests are on fire. This happened in Seattle last summer before last. Kids don't go outside in the summer because the smoke was too unhealthy. So they are in full retreat. And so we ought to look for every opportunity in the educational forum to maximize students' opportunities. I really do believe that. And I appreciate the tenor of your question as well, which is to be looking for bridges across rivers that have not been forded, because that's really, really important here. That is happening. I just read this morning, the United Mine Workers are now approaching this issue a little differently, rather than just being resistant to any change on clean air laws and electrical grid laws, instead looking for a solution, a bridge to the future, recognizing the direction we have to go into. So you're seeing those kind of things happen, and you just hit a very important chord that we've got to maximize the chance to find common ground everywhere that we can. And I'm glad we got leaders like Becky at NEA and Valerie Rockefeller helping us do that. Their names are on this list. I don't know if they're called or not, but I'm glad we have good leaders trying to do that everywhere we can, including yourself.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Governor Whitman, you're muted.
That's the trouble when I turn it off. I forget to turn it on again. Governor Inslee, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. And thank you also for having been the inspiration that you've been to Aspen to actually start this whole process that we're in today. And we hope to have a working document, and that we will have a working document in the not too distant future to share with the administration and others as to how we can maximize the impact of our schools in a positive way to deal with the issue of climate change. So thank you very much for spending your time with us.
Well, thanks for your continued leadership. You've done so much for our country, and you keep doing it. We just love the work you've done, and we love the work you're doing. So let's keep it up.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Governor, for joining us, and
Be well.
know that we're here to support you.
All right, you are. Thanks a million. Thanks, Aspen. Take care.
All right, Emily, you good to stop the stream?
Not quite yet.
Well, I just want to take a minute and just say thank you all. Thank you, Andrew and Jerome and Anna, and it was great to have Governor Inslee. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions there at the end, but thank you all so much. This was a great session. And Emily, are we good now?
Ben, would you mind ending the stream? I think you're the host right now.
Great. Well, as we're taking care of that, I will just go ahead and get started on talking about some of the things that we're going to share right now. Thank you all for joining this session, and great to celebrate Earth Day and everything that we have coming up. So we just wanted to talk quickly about some of the next steps for the commission's work ahead, and what our plans are going forward. We have now started with the work groups, and I'm going to share my screen in a second, but I want to make sure that we're off YouTube when I'm sharing my screen to show some of our internal work. So we'll get to that in just one second. But you all have signed up for the working groups, and we appreciated you taking the time to sign up for the working groups. We are going to be sharing documents with you all that will be rough outlines for how we're thinking about the different framing sections around mitigation, adaptation, education, and advancing equity. These are very much outlines and rough drafts because we are just putting something on paper to get your responses and reactions to, so that we can work to make it better and integrating everyone's thoughts and feedback into that. Emily, are we off now?
Not yet. If Ben, if you could help end the live stream, that would be great. Thank you.
Hey, Emily, this is Nikki. Can you send me the login info? Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry about this. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen too. It's nothing. We're not super private here on what we're doing, so we're good with being fully transparent in our work that we have ahead of us. So this is just in general what we're, the structure that we're thinking about for the action plan, what we've talked to you all about. So thinking about the 4 framing sections on mitigation, adaptation, education, and advancing equity.